Does Dougie Hamilton's value increase if he leaves Carolina? Tune in to find out as we drop the puck.
Hunter McDavid, Draisaitl scores!
Pasternak, Marchand, he'll drag it right in for a chance. He scores! Look at ball, Kane, dancing in, Kane,
Save! Holy mackerel, what a save! Made by Marc-Andre Fleury!
unbelievable by Austin Matthews. A complete turnaround.
We're going to Boston, baby!
Hello, everybody. My name is Antonio Capos. I'm here alongside with my co-host, Azim Manzour. How you doing today?
Not bad, bud. Happy to be here.
Obviously, a lot of news around the league this week. Duncan Keith start this off going to the Oilers. I think it's interesting to see that they didn't actually get any cap held off it. Like Chicago didn't withhold any of his cap, which I was assuming was going to happen because Edmonton, like, it's always better to have a lot more cap space if you're trying to sign free agents to make a run, right?
Yeah, especially when you're giving up a good defensive prospect like Caleb Jones and a third round pick, I think it's a lot to pay for a trade, but I don't know, not retaining any salary to me is a big loss, in my opinion.
I mean, it's good to note, though, that if Duncan Keith ends up retiring at the end of this year, Edmonton will be entitled to an extra $3.4 million cap hit, meaning that instead of the flat $82 million that you can spend on players next year, they'll be able to spend 85.4, I believe.
Yeah, that's definitely useful trying to sign some free agents or, Darnell Nurse is up next year, so getting an extension done could be a lot easier then.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on, it seems as though Oscar Klefbom and Shea Weber, not Shea Theodore, won't be protected going into the expansion draft, both because of potential career-ending injuries. Weber was just released, I think, a couple days ago that he had a foot and knee injury that it looks like will keep him out all of this year, if not for the rest of his career if he decides to retire.
Yeah, this is a huge loss to both the Canadians. Obviously you're losing your captain, Weber, for fantasies, and he was one of the elite defensemen. Obviously has fallen off a bit over the last couple of years, but still definitely a solid defenseman to have on your team. And for Oscar Klefbom, we got a glimpse of what it was like without him this year, but Klefbom, lots of upside. I think in dynasty leagues, you have to drop him now. Because even if he does come back, is he going to be the same? Probably not, especially with Darnell Nurse taking a huge offensive leap. That power play when ice time could be gone. So it's unfortunate, but it is the game, unfortunately.
Indeed. Moving on, Ryan Sutter and Zach Parise were both bought out by the Wild. This leaves it open for teams like Boston and like LA to pick up, actually sign in free agency players like Ryan Sutter and Parise instead of having to trade for them, which obviously if you're teams like that with a lot of cap space right now, it's very helpful because then you don't have to give up any assets to get good solid pieces.
Right, and you're also not stuck with the 4 years left on the deal. But no, Sutter to Boston, I've heard is a rumor that you're going to hear a lot of it. Parise's got a lot of suitors. Toronto, I heard someone. Edmonton, but I found it ironic that both were signed on the exact same day and both were bought out on the exact same day. I think that's kind of funny, but
yeah, I was actually surprised about the Parise. Not so much about the Sutter, but I thought that they were going to try and stick with Parise. Obviously, I think their main idea with this was that they're wanting to get more cap so they can bring back Kaprizov.
Yeah, for sure.
So
they probably got to pay Kaprizov a lot of money to sign long term in Minnesota.
Right. Moving on, Jacob Voracek is to be left unprotected as well in this expansion draft. They're him and the Flyers are both looking for a new start. I think Voracek is, he used to be very like a very solid fantasy player, but now he's been kind of riding the waiver wire. So I think with a new start with possibly like Seattle, um, he could definitely be a solid piece. Like if he could end up being on Seattle's first line, getting a ton of minutes and definitely first power play. So look for him to increase his value this year.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of think of him as like a James Neal type player who, was just coming off of a bad year, but a new sense of scenery, A lot of guys who get drafted to Seattle, especially some of the veterans, expect them to have really good years just from the motivation factor. We saw it with guys like James Neal and David Perron, and if Jacob Voracek's one of those guys, I think we can see a similar type of season.
Yeah, definitely. Moving on, Keith Yandel, brought up by the Panthers. And it's looking like the Bruins are trying to get more of a solid defensive core for this coming year. And they're rumored, of course, for Sutter. And also now it seems like Yandel's another recurring name. Same thing was happening like last offseason. It looked like they might have picked up Yandel. But we'll see what they do this year. They have lots of cap space. But yeah, I think Keith Yandel just adds that kind of more of a veteran presence, especially if he was going to go to Boston, he would get tons of minutes, because they just have so like many like B tier young defensemen who I don't think there's a couple of them that I don't think should have been brought up to the NHL quite yet. Obviously, it's better to get their development started, but yeah, he would definitely be a good fit on that team.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, Keith Yandel, one of the elite power play quarterbacks. I don't know if he'll take McAvoy's job anytime soon, but even for that power play two unit, Boston a deep team offensively, definitely lots of opportunity there. I think to become fantasy relevant again.
Yeah, definitely. All right, and finally, Brandon Carlo, although he's not very fantasy relevant as of yet, he was signed to a 6-year, $4.1 million contract with the Bruins. If you're in a Bangos league, he can be valuable because he does get those hits and those blocks. However, if you're in a points league, he's basically irrelevant just because he doesn't bring as much of that offensive game as you'd like to see.
Yeah, definitely in Bengals leagues, especially in your dynasty leagues, lots of opportunity with the Bruins, transitioning to a more, young defensive corps, expect him to really start to bloom in the next couple of years. Really good young player.
All right, that's everything for the first segment. All right, welcome back, everyone. It's Antonio Capos here again with Azim. Now we're going to be going into our final fantasy segment, talking about the UFAs and their potential landing spots for this upcoming free agency come, I believe free agency opens on the 25th.
Yeah, definitely. It's a pretty solid free agency class. Lots of stars. It's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be a good free agent class. Lots of fantasy relevant players. So let's start right away.
All right. First off, on our UFA block, we have Alex Ovechkin. I think it'd be a shocker if he didn't go back to Washington. They're getting rid of Kuznetsov just to get like more cap for him. So I think, they'll sell like they'll get rid of their whole team before they get rid of Ovechkin.
Yeah, definitely. We talked about it a bit last episode. How there was a rumored extension done, and yeah, like Antonio said, I expect Ovechkin to be there for another 4 years, like his buddy Backstrom. But there's honestly no world where he leaves Washington. If for whatever reason he does, I believe we would go back to Dynamo Moscow, the team in the KHL where he first started his career. But on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being no chance, 10 being like no way yes, he's gone. There's like a 0. Like there's no way Ovechkin leaves Washington. Ovechkin last year, solid season, 24 goals, 18 assists in just 45 games. So clearly still has it. But again, Washington doesn't change much. It's going to be more of the same.
Definitely. Okay, moving on. We have Dougie Hamilton. This is the biggest name I think that's out there that we don't know where he's gonna go. There's been many teams rumored. Obviously, he was on Carolina, so that's always a possibility. But it seems that they're going to be parting ways. Um, but it's looking like some of the top candidates are going to be Toronto, Chicago, and Philly, with Chicago being the favorite, just because I think they have a little bit more cap space. And, they've been looking to make like a final run with Kane and Taves for a while. And I think they didn't really want to go for it quite last year because Taves was still out with a nagging injury. He'll be back for the start of the season. So I think you can look for them to be a contender. And not necessarily a contender, but they'll definitely be looking for that playoff spot.
Yeah, definitely. I know that there's been a lot of Seth Jones to Chicago rumors, but realistically, I don't think that's going to happen. Chicago, I don't think has the assets necessarily to get a deal done that a team like Philadelphia necessarily has. And with a new cap space after the Duncan Keith deal, Dougie Hamilton, I think, is a great fit in Chicago. So, do you think Dougie Hamilton's value increases or if it decreases if he's in Chicago?
I think it's going to take an increase actually because he's going to get tons of ice time. He'll likely be playing with Kane and an elite offensive player a ton, um, as well as possibly DeBrincat. He'll have time on ice with those two guys. And DeBrincat's a sniper. Patrick Kane's an amazing playmaker. There's just going to be a lot of opportunity to get points there, as well as his defensive game that he brings. So he's definitely going to be. I think he's going to average like over 20 minutes of ice time this coming year if he goes to
Yeah,
Chicago.
yeah, definitely. Also considering the fact that Chicago, paid him and, one last round, they're going to want to play him as much as they can. I do worry about, again, like you made lots of good points about the power play. I also do wonder though. He played on a very good offensive team in Carolina with young studs like Sebastian Aho, Andrei Svechnikov, and I know Kane and DeBrincat are a little better, but how much more is that really going to increase his value? But I
No, I
definitely don't think it takes
think
a hit at
value
all.
increase. I think the main value increase is that he's no longer going to be on a defense that has like the likes of Jacob Slavin, Brady Skay. That Carolina defense last year was the best defense in the league, and this year was still top five, right? So like his minutes were kind of reduced because of that, and obviously with more minutes comes more chance to have points, and with that your fantasy value is going to increase.
That's actually a very good point. Yeah, especially Chicago. They're not too strong of a defensive team, so they're going to need him out on the ice a lot.
Right. Moving on, number 3, Gabe Landeskog. Obviously, Colorado has said they want him back. I think he's going to go back to Colorado, and obviously, I think he's going to have a similar year to what he did, like not this year but last year. Um, in terms of his actual output, I think he's going to decline just a little bit, but McKinnon increasing his output is going to like counterweight that, and he's just going to get a ton more assists, and I think he's just going to keep an equal fantasy value if he stays with Colorado. However, if he goes to St. Louis or Toronto, if he goes to St. Louis, I think his value drops like considerably. However, if he goes to Toronto, he'll likely be playing with either Matthews or Tavares, so I think it's going to be a similar situation to Colorado.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talks about him potentially leaving, and a team like the Blues making a huge run at him. Personally, I don't think there's a better fantasy situation for him than Colorado. You know, unless he gets to play with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, which he won't be. I don't think he's going to get two better line mates than McKinnon and Mikko Rantanen. So, especially because his game complements them really well. But
Matthews and Marner is very comparable, right? Like that's
Matthews and Marner is comparable. I will say that though.
But I doubt even if he did go to Toronto, I think that they would like stick somebody else on the first line. Like, you know, Keith likes to mix up his lines a lot, so I think he would end up being on the second line with like a Nylander and Tavares, which still isn't bad, but it's not even comparable to the likes of McKinnon and Rantanen.
Definitely, and we're also assuming Mitch Marner's going to be back on the team. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of rumors in the off season, but No, Colorado's probably still the favorite, but I think it's one of those things. Think Alex Petrangelo in St. Louis, where we all assumed it was just going to get done, and then before you know it, he's on a different team. But if he does leave Colorado, I think he'll be a St. Louis Blue.
Right. Moving on, Taylor Hall. I think they just need to put pen to paper. Like it looks like the contract's just all drawn up and that they're just waiting for the expansion draft to pass so that they don't have to actually cover his rights. But yeah, I think it would be a shocker if Taylor Hall leaves Boston, especially with everything that he's been saying about the city so far.
Yeah, exactly. We kind of, last season tried to force a trade there, and then, strong season, after just 19 points and after just 19 points in, 37 games in Buffalo with only 2 goals, he's up to 8 goals, 6 assists in only 16 games in Boston. So he's a great fit there, great second line winger, and he's a huge bounce back candidate for next year.
Definitely. Moving on, Philip Grubauer is a free agent. Again, he was I think second place in the running for the Vezina this year. Definitely a strong goalie. Sorry, I think he was third actually behind Vasilevsky, but he's a top 5 goalie in the league. Currently, he had 30 wins last year in 40 games played. Obviously, he had an amazing team in front of him in Colorado. I expect him to return because I don't think he can do any better anywhere else. Colorado's just such a good team. They just outscore their opponents. It doesn't even matter if he lets in goals.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. Obviously, Grubauer's an elite goalie, 1.95 goals against average, 922 save percentage. Again, he's talked so much about the city of Colorado, talked about, his love for it, his passion for it. Obviously, they gave him, a true chance at being a number one goalie when they traded for him a couple of years ago. If he does leave, I could see Edmonton making a run at him. Obviously, we're really aggressive in the goalie market last year, almost signing Jacob Markstrom and, getting deep discussions with Braden Holtby. And then Toronto is another team. I think this one, again, kind of like Gabe Landeskog. I think it's unlikely he leaves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But
I think Colorado's going to try and bring back the same group as they had last year, as best they can.
Definitely. He's a huge part of their success.
Moving on, Tyson Barrie. This is an interesting one. He was with Edmonton this year. He had 48 points in 56 games, I believe. He was a top 5 defenseman in points leagues. It looks like he might be going to Carolina just to replace Dougie Hamilton. But I wouldn't be surprised if he returned to Edmonton.
This one's tricky. Honestly, I could single in a lot of places. There's always going to be a want to return to Edmonton. Obviously, with such a great fit, but I do think Edmonton, bringing in prospects like Philip Broberg and more so Evan Bouchard, who has a very similar game, I think will expect kind of eliminate a market for him in that sense. But Carolina for sure is a name to watch, a team to watch to replace Dougie Hamilton. If Chicago doesn't get him, I could see a nice fit there. And a sleeper team I think to watch is Philadelphia. We talked about them, getting Seth Jones a little bit, but I do think if they don't get Seth Jones, they could get him as a potential move to bolster that blue line following the loss of Matt Niskanen.
I think we have to remember that Barrie was elite when he was on Colorado before going to Toronto. And I think we just got to watch that. He had a great fit on Colorado, had a great fit on Edmonton this year, but his points dipped like majorly in Toronto because he just didn't have a good fit there. So we just you're gonna have to watch to see if he has a good fit wherever he goes this year, because obviously he's not that great defensively and he's very much just a solid offensive defenseman. So if he's not on the first power play on the team he goes to, which is very unlikely, but it could happen, his value drops significantly, and I think he's gonna have another like Toronto year.
Yeah, I think if he stays in Edmonton or goes to Chicago, I think he'll stay, one of your top 10 defensemen in points leagues. I do worry about the fit in, Carolina and, Philadelphia with lots of good defensive defensemen and, young offensive forwards who can score. So, there may not be as much of a need for him, but I think it's going to be interesting to watch. I think this is one of, the true free agencies where if he goes to any of these teams, I would not be surprised the slightest.
Yeah, definitely. All right, moving on to our number 7, Zach Hyman. This is another interesting one. It looks like he's done in Toronto. His agent has been allowed to talk to other teams to see if there's a possible trade in terms of signing rights that could happen like at the NHL draft or before. Yeah, I
Can
really
you
don't.
hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, damn it, my mic was broken.
Oh,
Okay, well, my AirPod just died, so.
all right. I'll go back to talking about Hyman. What? All
So
right.
wait, yeah, go ahead.
All right. Our number 7 player is Zach Hyman. Now, obviously, earlier this week, Hyman and Toronto kind of decided to part ways. It looked like there was no deal that was going to happen there. I think it's just because Toronto ultimately doesn't have the cap space to bring him back. And they've now allowed Hyman's agent to go and explore with other teams possible contracts to see if there's a possible trading of signing rights that could happen at the draft. Overall, unless he goes to Edmonton, I think his value dips because he's likely not going to be a top 6 forward. I mean, obviously, if he goes to Detroit, that team's so bad that it doesn't really matter if he's a top 6 forward or not, because like even if he plays with the likes of Dylan Larkin, his points are still going to dip because he's not going to be playing with a Tavares or a Matthews. However, if he goes to Edmonton, I could see him playing with definitely McDavid or Draisaitl, which is just an overall increase in his value. So you're just gonna have to watch for where he lands. But I like Edmonton as the best fit for him.
Yeah, I agree. It's just also important to note, guys, Hyman's a better real life player than a fantasy player. So, if he goes to a team like Calgary, Vancouver, Detroit, or Boston, he would be a guy that I potentially look to avoid.
Yeah. Moving on, Jaden Schwartz. Now, last year he had a down year with only 21 points in 40 games. However, the year before that he was amazing with 57 points in 71 games. I could see him re-signing with St. Louis. If he goes to Edmonton, I would watch for him to have a bounce back year. And same with LA because you'd just be getting more ice time to a top 6 forward. And I think like even though he's getting a little bit more up there in age, he could still have a good year.
Yeah, I agree. A little bit left in the tank was, really good the last 2 years before, falling off a bit this year. I think that was just more to, a rough pandemic year than anything else. But we'll see. I do like St. Louis as a landing spot, though.
Right. Moving on, Tuukka Rask is a UFA. It looks like if he doesn't return to Boston, he's just going to go straight into retirement. So yeah, I don't think he's worth a. I would watch picking him, especially in the yearly league. I wouldn't pick him too high, even though he's a solid goaltender. I personally avoided him in our draft this year because I knew that there's always that possibility that he retires. It's been talked about in the last couple of years. However, I do think they're going to re-sign him on a 1 or 2 year deal. Just as they get Swayman more adjusted to the NHL game.
I agree. Yeah, very solid goalie, but it's like one of those high risk, high reward picks. Personally, I'd rather go with a more solid goalie later on than Rask. But if Rask does play, Rask is.
Yeah, I think if he plays, he's a top 10 player.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Moving on, Ryan Sutter. It looks like he may be going to Boston. Obviously, Sweeney on Boston doesn't really like making big signings, so we'll see what happens. However, he's definitely a possibility he goes to Boston. So again, it's kind of similar to Keith Yandle, where he would be probably a top 4 defenseman for them. He'd just be playing on the left side with either McAvoy or Carlo. Yeah, I think he'd be solid for a couple this year and probably next year. His points would definitely go up a little bit because obviously the Boston is a better offensive team than the Wild. But yeah, I think his value increases wherever he goes. Really, he's going to be getting a little bit more ice time. This year he had to play behind the likes of Brodin and Dumba. Yeah, I think he's going to either be the same or have a slight increase in his fantasy value next year.
Yeah, I agree. The only team I'd really, don't like is the Kings, just because of the lack of defensive options. But other than that, no, I think this is a pretty much win-win scenario for all fantasy managers.
Definitely. Moving on, David Krejci, same scenario as Tuukka Rask. I don't think he's going to retire though. I think he's going to likely resign on a smaller contract. There really haven't been rumors of him going anywhere else except for Boston. But yeah, I could see him. I think he's either going to sign like a $3.54 million deal for 1 or 2 years, and retire with Bergeron, or he will just probably go play in the KHL right now.
Yeah, again, I don't see him leaving Boston considering how much he's meant to that franchise. Krejci's actually a really solid player, In your dynasty leagues, you got to be a little worried about the age, but in yearly leagues, definitely I think he's going to provide good value. 44 points in 51 games this year, so definitely still has it in the tank.
Mm-hmm. Moving on, this guy's not known for his offensive output, so definitely not in points leagues, but Philip Deneau. I think it'd be a shocker if he doesn't go back to Montreal, just because it's kind of in his blood. Yeah, he was definitely solid for them in the playoffs this year, helping them get to the finals. He was a big player in that. And again, he's one of those players that he plays way better in real life than he's valuable in fantasy. So I think I personally, if I touch him, he's going to be one of the last roster spots in my team.
I agree, definitely. But it's just one of those players you got to watch for, more, real life value than fantasy. But if he does stay in Montreal and, potentially gets the opportunity to play with Caulfield, it could be a nice, stream for a week or two.
Yeah, definitely. Next on the list is Alec Martinez. I think I like what he's done with Vegas this year. He's definitely improved his value from what he was in LA. I think you have to watch if he was to go to like a less talented group like Seattle or Detroit, that his value is likely going to drop back to what he was in LA. Still probably rosterable, but he might be moving towards like one of those bottom spots in your roster, just like Deneau. However, I think if he stays with Vegas or if he goes to a more talented group like Seattle, then his value stays around the same, if not a little bit increased if he goes to a more offensive powered team just for the next year. I don't think that he will be a top 5 Bengals defenseman again, though. I think that was just a bit of a fluke because a lot of other defensemen around the league were kind of injured this year. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just interesting. I think there's definitely lots of value, in your Bengals league. In a points league, maybe I think more of a name value now after this big year. But again, Vegas is the best destination. I predict he's going to go to Detroit just because of the amount of money that they're going to throw at him. But Vegas or St. Louis, definitely in the Bengals league, he's going to be on my radar. But I'm going to start to fade him more in Detroit, Seattle, or anywhere else, to be honest.
Yeah, right. All right, moving on. Blake Coleman. I think, he's one of those players, again, that in real life, he has more value than he does in fantasy. Um, he's a very solid player, and he'll still put up, like this year, he put up 31 points in 55 games. Pretty solid for Tampa. I think basically any team that has money and needs a forward wants him. So he could really go anywhere. I think the favorites right now are Vancouver. But yeah, I don't think there's much. The way he plays, I think that he's just a solid player, and it doesn't really matter where he goes because he's going to be on the third line. He's probably going to be heading the third line, and it's just about if that team has depth or not that he'll be playing with.
Yeah, I think the only real scenario where his fantasy value increases is Edmonton, where, top six, obviously looking for Connor McDavid's wingers. One thing that's good about Coleman is the amount of ice time he gets. Obviously, he's really good defensively, so, coaches trusted him. Think Tampa, a loaded offensive team, he was getting a lot of minutes. But his shorthanded value as well. So something to note for in, potential category league for shorthanded points is really useful. But again, like you said, I'm only really fading him on a team with not much offensive talent like Ottawa or Detroit, where, he may be asked to carry more of an offensive load than he can. Think who he was in New Jersey, but he's just a very solid player overall.
Right. And finally, Adam Larson is the 15th person on our list here. I really don't think he's going to go anywhere else except for Edmonton. He's a solid piece there, especially with the fact that they're leaving Clefbaum unprotected. It points to them staying with Larson, and Nurse is the top two defensemen. He's very valuable, more so in a Bangos league than he is in a points league, just because he doesn't, like this year, he only had 10 points in 56 games, but his blocks and hits make up for it. And he still ends up averaging about two to three fantasy points per game.
Yeah, definitely as an Oilers fan, Adam Larson, you're kind of treading into that, more valuable in real life kind of thing. But definitely, as Antonio mentioned, great source of blocks and hits. If you're talking, I think he's more valuable in a categories league, to be honest, where, he's got enough potential to win you blocks and win you hits. But, I don't see him going anywhere than Edmonton. There was a report a couple months ago that, they believe him and Edmonton have a deal in place for, 4 years, 3.75 million. But again, I like Larson. I think Edmonton's a great fit for him, and he's going to be a solid player for years to come.
Yeah, definitely when he's going to be playing with somebody like McDavid or Draisaitl, I think his points are going to go up. I can't see him staying at like around the 10 point per 56 game pace. I think he's definitely going to, like next year, hopefully we'll have a full season of hockey. And I think that he's going to be around 25, 30 points.
Yeah, I agree, definitely.
All right. Just reported actually, Anthony Duclair was actually signed as well to the Panthers on an extension. That's good for them.
Yeah, definitely. I like the contract. Duclair's a really solid player. I would agree.
Here especially because they still have Barkov and Huberdeau. That's very helpful. But just watch that next year if you're in a dynasty league, his value is going to dip considerably because it seems that Huberdeau and Barkov are both going to leave in free agency. So just watch for that.
I agree. Maybe a good dynasty sell maybe after this year.
Right. All right. Thank you everybody for listening. And be sure to meet us back here next week, same time, same place, when we talk about the results of the Seattle expansion draft and its effect on your season. The next time we drop the puck. Have a good one, everybody.